And as humans, we tend to stop them being dogs. We kind of want to just have them sit and do nothing. Well, I don't think any husky belongs in India, to be honest. No. Not important at all, no.
No, not important at all?
No. If they, get rabies and they have symptoms of rabies, then that is 100% fatal. There is no cure for it. Try not to self-medicate your dogs, because if you don't know what's wrong with them and you're just guessing, you might give them something that is going to make the condition worse.
First question, how much activity is required for our dogs to stay fit?
This depends a lot, because obviously it depends on the age of the dog, the size of the dog, and the health of the dog. If you have a very small puppy, it doesn't need the same exercise as, a husky in its prime, yeah? So it does vary. If you have a breed dog like a husky, then obviously you should do research to find out its exercise requirements, because huskies, they were bred for pulling sleighs. Yes. In very, very cold conditions. So if you have a husky in Mumbai, you don't want to be running around crazy, but the thing is, it needs to release that energy, because they are very high energy dogs. So if you don't exercise them enough, they're going to get very bored, stressed, and probably start showing behavioural problems. So it's a difficult question to answer, because it does vary so much on the dog. But if you have a dog and you don't have a garden, and you can only keep it on a balcony, or you're worried about it running off and so you keep it on a chain, that's not a life for a dog. You have to take it for a walk. A dog in that situation should have a walk twice a day, at least, morning and evening. And depending on its age and size, for a minimum of half an hour. Yeah, and they need mental stimulation. They like to go and smell things. It's all part of being a dog. And as humans, we tend to stop them being dogs. We kind of want to just have them sit and do nothing. It's not fair. Yeah, it's very unfair on the dog.
Okay, and here you are talking about huskies. So I just want to know, huskies are very beautiful and they look very great, but this is not the area, even in the Manali, I think this is not the area where we can breed them or where we should domesticate them.
No. Well, I don't think any husky belongs in India, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
They were bred for very specific conditions. I mean, even places like, England and America, they're cooler, but it's still, that's the problem, is they are beautiful, and at the moment people like them, they're trendy, so people adopt them. But in a few years they won't be as trendy, and people will start dumping them on the streets, like they do with German Shepherds and things like that. At the moment, actually, we've seen a lot of pit bulls, even in Manali, and that's quite worrying, because if people start abandoning them when they get sick or they're just bored of them, it's not good to have a bunch of untrained pit bulls wandering around loose on the street. They were going to cause a lot of problems. So, yeah, I don't know who's breeding pit bulls, but I wish they would stop in India.
Does our dog's behavior change with the seasons?
Well, the weather, obviously, it does affect the dogs. When it's very hot, we find, that our dogs here, they just lie down all the time. It's too hot to be running around and jumping and playing. What happens is, at this time of year, when it gets a bit cooler in the evening, they all start being active, playing and running around. So it's probably a similar thing. When it's very hot, they don't want to do much. When it's cold, again, if it's very cold, they probably don't want to be outside. If they're being used to be inside, they want to stay inside where it's warm. When it's raining, they don't want to go outside when it rains. It does depend on the dog, because if you have a pet that's used to living inside, then when it does rain, they know it's raining and it's not comfortable, so they don't want to go out, and they'll stay inside. Our own pet dogs do. And these guys, when it rains, they all go inside the shelters, or they go inside the kennels, because it's nicer. Yeah.
Okay, and I think
So-
it depends upon the variety of the dog,
yeah,
breed of the dog
exactly,
also.
yeah. You get some dogs that they do like the rain, and when it rains, they'll lie out in it, and it doesn't bother them. They usually have very thick coats, and so, you know, it doesn't bother them at all.
Okay, but what about the behavior of a dog according to the season?
Well, the behaviour is, the main behaviour would be just becoming less active and staying indoors more, you know, when it's hot, when it's raining. In terms of other behaviours, I don't think there's anything specific that's season related. It's more about their energy levels and how much activity they want to do. And the eating less. Some eat less in the summer, sorry, because it's hotter, like us.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But there is definitely a behavioral change in dogs when it's mating season,
Yes,
isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, males that are unsterilised, they will try and roam and go out if they're pet dogs, so probably want to try it. They can smell the females in heat from, I don't know exactly how far, but it's several miles they can smell. So they will go off to try and find them, fight with other males, get injuries, and then maggot wounds and all sorts of other things. So yeah, definite behaviour changes. The females become more loving. They probably want to go out more to
Okay.
try and find a mate. You know?
Okay. And what about the aggression? Because in case of cats, I think we see also the same aggression during their mating season.
Yeah, yeah.
So can they bite us or can they harm us during their mating season if we don't?
Well, they can if, for example, you get in their way. So I think, you know, sometimes male dogs will mainly fight amongst each others over females. And then if you try and break them up, you can get bitten by them caught up. But I don't think that, you know, if you have a male dog, that just because there's a female in heat, it will purposefully bite you for no reason. It's not like that. It's a case of sometimes it's just like you're in the way, they're trying to do something. Yeah.
How important mating is for our pet dogs?
Oh, not important at all. No.
No, not important at all.
No. You should sterilize your dog, your pet dog. Don't let it breed, because the dogs that they're going to breed with are the street dogs. Yeah, this is what happens. People get a pet, usually, you know, obviously usually a male, and then they let it roam around, and then it goes and mates with the street dogs and makes the population bigger. The male does not need to mate. Once you've sterilized the dog, it is very happy. It doesn't have any psychological or emotional need to mate like, you know, humans. It's a biological thing, and it only happens when a female is in heat. So if there's no female in heat around, it's not bothered about mating. It doesn't think about mating. It's just doing its other things. It's quite happy.
Okay.
And the same with females. You know, you should sterilize a female before it comes into heat for the first time, because then you reduce the risk of mammary tumors, pyometra, TVT transmission. A female dog does not need to have a litter of puppies, you know. There's none of this kind of emotional thing connected with dogs. It's a biological thing. They come into heat, biology says breed, you know. But there are enough dogs, they're not going to go extinct if the street dogs are not breeding, or if the pet dogs are not breeding.
Okay. And you are also talking about not just about the population, but you are also talking about the diseases they can get after mating.
Yeah, they can get a type of cancer from mating. You know, they also get diseases. They lose a lot of weight, especially the dogs living on the street that don't have people regularly feeding them. And so they end up getting, you know, after having puppies, they're in usually pretty bad condition. So yeah, there are a lot of health problems. If you're an actual breeder who's doing it responsibly and properly for the right reasons, not just to make a quick buck kind of thing and leaving your animals in poor condition, then you know, you can make sure that the animals are well cared for and bred in a responsible and compassionate way, rather than breeding your females every time they come in season and then discarding them once they don't breed anymore. So, but yeah, they don't need to breed. The street dogs don't need to breed, which is why we have a sterilization program. And our aim is to sterilize as many street dogs in this area as possible, and pet dogs as well. We encourage all the pet owners to get their dogs sterilized.
Okay, so what is sterilization?
So sterilization is a generic term just to mean that they are sterile, they can't breed, whereas neutering is just like the process. We call
We are
neutering.
neutering something.
Exactly, and that's for males and females, neutering. If you're talking specifically about females, then you spay the dog, which is removing the ovaries and the uterus. And if you're talking about males, you castrate the dog, which is where you remove the testicles.
Okay. When it comes to sterilization, there is a specific age to sterilize a dog. So what is that age?
Well, there's a minimum age, and the minimum age for dogs is 4 months. Ideally, you would not sterilize them that young, especially pets. You don't need to sterilize pets that young. You're better letting them grow. And, because the hormones that are produced by the testes and the ovaries, they're important for a growing dog. So, but for females, you want to sterilize them before they come into heat for the first time, which is usually around 8 to 9, 10 months, depending on the dog. And for males, it doesn't matter so much because they don't, but roughly, if it's a pet dog, around 8 or 9 months is probably fine, 9 to 10 months. But just in the meantime, don't let it go out mating with other dogs and adding to the stray dog population.
Okay. So, is there any side effect of sterilization?
Sometimes, very occasionally, mainly with the females, the main side effect is that they can get this thing called urinary incontinence. It just means that because estrogen is involved in helping to control the bladder. So occasionally they become a little bit incontinent, which means that they might be sleeping and they might dribble urine in their sleep and they don't realize. But not so many do suffer from that. And it's not life-threatening, it's just as a pet, it might be inconvenient to the owner. I mean, the pet doesn't really care. But the owner, if they're letting it on the bed or the furniture in the house, they might not like it so much. But you can get medication which helps to control if that does happen. And then the other side effect that people notice is that the dogs usually put weight on. But that's simply because their metabolism slows down. They don't have as much need for as much energy. So people continue feeding them the same amount. So then they put weight on. But that's the only reason. If you reduce their food intake slightly, then their weight will maintain.
What are the most common viral and fatal diseases in dogs?
So there's probably 3 rather than 1. So obviously rabies is a very big one. Rabies, yeah. Okay. So rabies is fatal. If a dog actually gets rabies and starts to show symptoms of rabies, it's fatal. There is nothing you can do to save it. So unfortunately then the dog has to be humanely euthanized. Some people might say, well, just leave the dog, it'll die anyway, but it dies in excruciating agony. It is an awful disease, and no, you should never just allow the dog to die on its own because it's very painful. The dog suffers, and there is a risk that the dog then in that time bites another dog or human and passes on the disease. So it's very irresponsible to ever suggest just let the dog, die. You should humanely euthanize the dog as soon as possible. The other diseases are parvovirus.
Which virus?
Parvovirus.
Okay.
This is a virus that infects lots of puppies, especially in the winter. We have one small room dedicated to just treating parvo cases because it is highly contagious. And it mainly affects puppies, and you get vomiting, you get diarrhea. They have blood in the diarrhea, they don't eat for days, they often don't drink. So what happens is they lose all their energy, they become very sick, all their electrolytes in their body become out of balance, and they can, if they're not treated, they will usually die. But if treated, then there's probably a 90-95% chance that they'll survive, as long as you get them treated in time. You know, if you have a puppy and it's not eating, don't wait 5 days before you get help. You know, usually puppies, they are very food, you know, they're hungry, so they'll eat every day. So if you have a puppy and for one day it doesn't eat, usually there's something wrong with it, so you should get it looked at by a vet.
Okay.
And then distemper is another one. We've seen a lot of that over the last year.
Yes, including our dog.
Yeah, this affects puppies and adults. And again, this one is quite a bad disease. It affects the respiratory system. So they get a thick discharge from the eyes, from the nose. Sometimes they have a cough. And then later on, what happens is they can develop neurological signs. So they might become weak or even paralyzed in the back legs usually. They have trouble walking, they have twitching, they might start having seizures. And again, that's highly contagious because the virus is spread by all the bodily fluids of a dog. So if it goes to the toilet, if it coughs or sneezes, if it vomits, then if it's in its saliva, then it can pass on to other dogs. So,
Okay.
But there is a vaccine for all of these things, so you should always get your dog vaccinated.
But if a dog get affected by canine distemper or any 2 viruses or 3 viruses you were talking, if they get affected, what are the chances of their survival?
Well, parvovirus, like I said, if they're treated in time, usually it's around 90-95% chance of survival. It just depends on how soon you get the dog to a vet. And they need treatment twice a day. It's no good just doing it every other day or when you feel like it. They need intensive treatment. Distemper virus, it's very hard to tell. We see dogs that do survive it, even without any treatment. And then others, you'll treat them, but once they go on to the more severe neurological symptoms, like having seizures, then there's much less chance of survival. Okay. So that one is a little more varied. It's a bit difficult to say. And it's usually probably maybe 50-50. Whereas rabies is, if they, get rabies and they have symptoms of rabies, then that is 100% fatal. There is no cure for it.
Okay.
And that's the same for humans. If humans are affected by rabies, there's no cure. So always get your dogs vaccinated.
Okay, so what is the main difference between rabies and distemper?
They do have similar symptoms. So rabies, it affects the nervous system only. You generally don't get any of these other symptoms like the discharge. So it's passed on from the bite of another infected animal. So it's in the saliva. So the virus travels up the nerves to the brain, and once it's in the brain, that's when you start getting these symptoms of, sometimes biting, not all the time. Sometimes the dogs become very quiet and move away and shy away from people.
Okay.
But you get these behavior changes. So from what's typical of one dog, it will suddenly become different. And so if you know the dog, you'll know there's something different about this dog.
About this dog.
Yeah. A friendly dog might suddenly become aggressive, whereas a normally quite aggressive or nervous dog might suddenly become a lot calmer and allow you to stroke
less
it.
energetic, less active.
Yeah. So there's 2 forms of rabies. One is known as dumb rabies, and the other is known as furious rabies. And that's because the dumb rabies, they normally become more lethargic. They're usually paralyzed. They're not moving about as much, and they're just like lying on the side. Often have breathing issues because the muscles of the lungs become paralyzed and they can't breathe properly. And then the furious form is that typical stereotypical rabies thing where they're biting things, they're chasing and drooling. But the drooling is because the muscles in their throat become paralyzed, so they can't close their mouth and swallow, so the saliva falls out of their mouth.
Okay.
So that's the only reason that there's not, yeah.
Skin conditions and hair fall in dogs.
Well, this one is Demodex mange. So this is caused by a weak immune system.
Weak immune system.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's very common in the street dogs because often they don't get the nutrition that they need. So Demodex is caused by a mixture of environmental factors and genetic. So sadly, she was probably predisposed genetically to have this condition. And because on top of that, then she didn't get the correct food that she needed as a puppy, and later on, she's probably got this weak immune system, and then she's got this Demodex. And Demodex is caused by a small mite that all dogs have. They all have it, but their immune system keeps it in control and stops it getting out of control and getting bigger and bigger, or more and more. So with her, the Demodex mites have proliferated and got more and more, and then they live in the hair follicles and damage them, so then the hair falls out.
Okay. So is there any cure for these?
Yes, so we treat her. There's a couple of different medications that you give, but you have to know that it is this condition before you give the medicine. There's several other conditions that cause hair fall or missing fur patches, and they're not all Demodex. And the treatment for the Demodex is usually ivermectin, but that's only for that. You can't, if your dog has a flea allergy, you can't treat it with ivermectin. It doesn't work. And ivermectin is quite a harsh drug, and you don't want to be giving ivermectin to any dog you see with a skin problem, because it can be dangerous.
Okay. So in case of dog, what is the main thing we should always avoid? First, in terms of food. Second, in terms of their hygiene. Third, in terms of their drugs or medication, if we are curing them by ourselves.
Oh, okay. Well, so food-wise, like I said, there are certain foods that are toxic and you should never give, like chocolate, onions, grapes, and raisins. You should never give them that. And also make sure that they never have access to things like chewing gum. Or because chewing gum usually has a artificial sweetener in it called xylitol. Xylitol is very bad for dogs. It lowers their glucose levels severely and can cause, coma and death. Yeah. So don't let them have any artificial sweetened foods. So in terms of medication, you shouldn't try not to self-medicate your dogs, because if you don't know what's wrong with them and you're just guessing, you might give them something that is going to make the condition worse. Lots of people, they might just give antibiotics just because they feel like it. I mean, even humans do that to themselves, which is not good because it contributes to the whole antibiotic resistance. You need to know which bacteria the dog has so that you can give the correct antibiotic and the correct dose and for the correct duration. If you do it yourself, you're probably setting the dog up to become resistant and have further problems.
Okay. Yeah. And in case of hygiene, what should we care of?
Well, in terms of hygiene, I don't think there's too much. Like I said, just, make sure the ears are clean, make sure the nails are not too long, make sure,
And I think you were talking about shampoo.
Yeah, use the correct shampoo. Okay. And don't shampoo too often. Just, you'll find that if you're feeding a good diet to the dog, they will have a very good coat. It will be very healthy. It will be very clean. Even if you take your dog out and it goes and gets really muddy, within a few hours, it will probably be clean again because they can just clean it themselves.
And at the end, what are the vaccinations our dog should get?
So, if you get a puppy, the first vaccination you should do it's a combined vaccination. It has a few names. Sometimes it's called a 5-in-1. Sometimes you can get 7-in-1s or 9-in-1s. And it protects against parvo, distemper, a kind of hepatitis, a couple of respiratory problems as well. So that's the first one, and that should be done at 6 weeks old. Or as soon as if you got your dog slightly later than that, then as soon as you get the dog. And then 1 month later, you give it a booster.
Booster.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a year after that, you give it another booster. And then after that, they say normally to vaccinate yearly. So that's the common protocol, I think, in India. I know in other countries they're moving more towards doing it every, say, 2 to 3 years, because, after 1 year, the vaccine doesn't just stop working. The immune system is quite clever. It kind of gradually goes off. It doesn't just stop. And in the West, we do these things called titer tests, where you can check to see how immune the dog is to these diseases, and so you know whether it needs a vaccine, so you're not vaccinating unnecessarily. But here in India, it's not as readily available. So to be safe, a lot of people, we just vaccinate yearly or every 2 years. But, every 2 years will probably be fine. But that puppy stage is very important to get at least the first 2 and then the year booster after a year.
Okay.
And then rabies, you start when the dog is 3 months old. And again, you do it when it's 3 months old. You do a booster when it's a month later, and then after a year, you do another one. And then for that, we recommend doing yearly boosters, because India is a endemic area for rabies. Other countries where it's not so common, again, you can probably get away with doing it less, but in India, it's probably better to make sure that each year they're up to date with their rabies.